Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on Dead Poets School. I'm really pleased to have you with us. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to be hosting the session this afternoon. Quick word about the EA. We are a learned society and a subject association which was formed in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through secondary and further education to higher education and beyond, and we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you ever so much to Ollie and Ellie for your time this afternoon. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. Membership starts at just £29, and that enables you to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. All right, that's enough from me because I'm delighted to introduce you to Ollie, who is part of the team that produces Dead Poets Live, and to Ellie, who's an English teacher who currently leads the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 curriculum for English in her school. Ollie, I'll hand over to you.
Uh, Thank you very much. Everyone hear me? Becky, am I all right? Yeah. Um, well, I just want to begin by saying a big thank you to you, Becky, for having us here today, and for giving us this opportunity to kind of talk about poetry and how it's taught in schools. I've know that I think the first thing to say from my point of view, but beyond thank you for having us here, is that what I'm presenting today is very much in the spirit of a kind of work in progress, and that uh, to the extent we've kind of come away since we began thinking about schools in 2022, it's thanks to the input of teachers such as Ellie and people who've fed back on what we've done, and through just meeting students, through performing in front of year sevens, year eights, and through watching teachers teach our lessons and teach their lessons in classrooms. So I think that's the kind of spirit in which I'm offering this today. That it's not a finished article. There's definitely room and scope to change what we do all the time. And I was very flattered and interested. Well, flattered because I just felt that the comments were so interesting and so thoughtful that I read some of the responses to the questions that you guys had put to you and the answers you gave, and they really resonated with. I was on Tuesday. I was in a school in Ilford. It's called Loxford School, and they laid on the teacher there, the head of English, Killian, had a CPD with his English department, and it was kind of convened, and they was discussing poetry and why students don't like poetry and their feelings about it. And I was just really struck that what everyone said in their responses to the three questions, resonated so closely with what was said there in that room. And I feel if I can just begin by just addressing some of those kind of comments and anxieties, and maybe suggesting a couple of antidotes at the outset. Then I'm going to move on to maybe explaining a bit about how Dead Poets School came to be, by way of a kind of illustrated tour. So I'll give you a little genesis story of how Dead Poets Live became Dead Poets School, and how and where that might be going in the future. But yeah, so just to address some of your comments, and maybe distill slightly some of the things that were said there, and reflect them against some of the things that were said in Ilford on Tuesday. I feel there are basically two very related problems that we're all hovering around. One is basically an anxiety when things come to poetry over difficulty. The feeling that there is an answer there that people aren't getting. And this, I think, relates to an element of confidence or lack of confidence around students in their own interpretations of poems. And also, I think, relates to a problem that teachers have and students feel about forgetting to begin with maybe some of the simpler questions about a poem, like literally what happens in a poem, what's the story of the poem. And I think that the second element that's there, these things kind of all relate to each other, but is a kind of element of relevance to the lives of the students. How does a student relate to the boat stealing scene in the prelude. How do you bridge that gap? Which isn't to say that we should abandon it altogether, but there's got to be some effort of translation there to bring what took place in Wordsworth's mind or on that lake, whatever it was, 220 years ago, to right to today. And some of the antidotes that I took away from Ilford, and I kind of sensed in some of the responses I read online with you guys in response on the form Becky sent, three, I think, really powerful things. The first of them, and I think this is definitely part of the spirit in which we've approached everything increasingly so, is the power of vulnerability. The admission, even from teachers, especially from teachers maybe, that they don't have all the answers, that they are ignorant, that there isn't necessarily a completely right answer. I think that's really powerful because I think it gets away from the idea that there might be, a kind of absolute answer, which is part of the anxiety. And I think it's a real disinhibitor in a room for the person who has the authority to kind of conspicuously not abdicate, but sort of suggest that they don't have all the answers. I think a teacher in Ilford said to me, because maybe it's a potentially a STEM mindset thing and a contrast between maybe humanities subjects like English or essays subjects where you can argue a bunch of different ways, and a STEM subject where there's a right or a wrong answer. She said to them, well, in science you have a hypothesis. You just put your hypothesis forward, and you have to defend that hypothesis with reference to evidence. It's exactly the same in English. She said that lands with some of them, doesn't land with others. So I think one of the most powerful antidotes we have, and there's something that's kind of baked into everything we're trying to do, is an element of vulnerability as a disinhibitor of the room. Building, I think, from the literal is the second thing. Always focusing on the story, beginning with the story. What's happening in the poem? Forget about what the parts of speech are or the rhetorical figures that are being used that maybe you have to talk about in an exam, but to begin with a sense of the literal, so you have something really concrete to hold on to. And finally, making an effort to translate what is in the poem into something local, something recognizable. So those three things, those three antidotes there, I want to kind of propose at the beginning. I think some of them were suggested by some of the comments already that you put forward. But I'm going to start sharing my screen now because I want to just explain about Dead Poets Live and Dead Poets School and how we kind of came to be where we are now. So let me share this with everyone now. Becky, can you see this? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with I'm going to start with Dead Poets Live itself, which was begun in 2016. 2017 was the first show, February 2017. You can see this little screen here, which has this little carousel of some of the people who've been in the shows. So it began, it was basically sponsored and originated by the T.S. Eliot Estate, the T.S. Eliot Foundation. And Claire, my boss, suggested to me and later this colleague who came on board, James, that we try and take some of the energy from this thing called Letters Live, which had been on in London. Maybe some of you have seen it, actors standing up and reading letters. Maybe we could do something similar with poems. And try and get well-known actors to read poems. But obviously that's been done before, so we tried to do something a little bit different, which is to kind of make little playlets, dramatize the life of poets or some episode from the life of poets or particular poems. We just did In Memoriam before Christmas. We've done a poem called The Broken Word before, but we've also done, the life of, Sylvia Plath, and had lots of wonderful actors doing it. This is our next show here, which is we're doing Brig Flats, a poem by Basil Bunting, with Simon McBurney there. So that'll be in June. But as you may have noticed, if you've been to a poetry event of a certain kind recently, is the audiences aren't getting any younger, unless you're going to a spoken word event where the energy is very different. And that's a very interesting thing, I think, about the way that we seem unable to connect a certain kind of poetry audience with another kind of poetry audience. I think it's something that maybe it feels like it's hanging around like nuclear fusion. Everyone knows that that this thing is possible in schools if we could connect these two things. And maybe some of the teachers who are watching this now will have thoughts about how to do that, or maybe have already done it in a successful way, which I'd be really interested to hear about. But yeah, so there's a problem with our audiences. They're not getting any younger, and I was sort of tasked with investigating what's going on in schools. Um, and that led to us visiting schools such as Ellie's, and we performed basically a show there, adapted from one of our first shows about nonsense poetry, and then I went away and wrote a specifically schools one, which is called "What is Poetry," which is an attempt for year sevens and eights to orient them at the beginning of their time in poetry with the question of like, why do we even do poetry? A kind of anthropology of poetry. So, what is the point of poetry? What does a poem do? Not getting into, here are the war poets, or which is what they're going to do anyway, but sort of trying to give them a blast at the beginning of, this is poetry. We've had it since the beginning of human records, of human culture, but what's it done for human beings? And trying to position it as a universal global human impulse, taking you from medieval Vietnam to, the song lines of Aboriginal Australia to the Ain Tenni in Madagascar, all the way through to Romeo and Juliet. So trying to break down some of these kind of, this is canon, this is oral poetry, trying to break down some of that and just begin from poetry as a universal human impulse. So here's some photos here of our shows. This was a school in Wales, South Wales, Maesteg. And here is the school that we actually that I've been talking about, the one in Ilford, Loxford School, where we and these are some of the actors who have taken part in our shows. Try to cast actors from the school, from the places local to the schools we are visiting. And try and group the schools regionally. So visit a bunch of schools in a particular area of the UK, and then cast actors who've just left drama school who are from that region. And I think that's actually been more powerful, the connection between actor and their locality, than any kind of celebrity. Just the sense of students watching people and feeling that they relate to that person on stage, both in terms of age and place. But yeah, that's been a very interesting and fulfilling experience, and actually a very endlessly humbling experience, as every teacher here will recognize, standing in front of a bunch of year sevens, eights, nines, and learning very quickly about what does and doesn't hold their attention. But because the problem here is scale, basically. This is all of these school tours have been supported and paid for by the T.S. Eliot Estate. It's free, entirely free to any school who wants us to visit them. And we'll hope it will remain that way. And I hope if some of you here are watching this evening and like the sound of this, that you'll get in touch with me. And we'll see about trying to kind of fit you into a particular tour. But the problem here is scale. There are 4,500 secondary schools in the UK, and we are very much focusing on secondary schools at the beginning of particularly kind of key stage 3 and 4, when the audience is still at its maximum. Because the hope here is that, it's not just for people who go on to do English at A level. It's for everyone. It's so that we can support a whole, population, a culture which actually feels unalienated when they hear a poem at a funeral, or sits down to read the Gruffalo with their children and feels, poetry is not something that feels alien to me. So we then looked to create an online digital platform, and that is what you sort of see before you here. So I'm just going to take you to the home page of that digital platform now. We created this. This was launched last year in November of last year, Dead Poets School, which is, again, free resources. Teachers, all they have to do to see and download everything is create an account, which is, again, free. We began with 3 strands. They're all kind of, as you'd expect, more or less curriculum adjacent. The anthologies in the middle, Shakespeare, which everyone studies, and poetry basics. And I realize I'm against the clock here, so I'm just going to be as quick as possible about explaining what these things are. But in your anthologies, you've got anthologies, all the GCSE anthologies, but we're beginning particularly with the ones that most people study, Power and Conflict. We've got some new stuff on Worlds and Lives there. I'm just going to take you to, so what we've done here is we have taken individual poems on the anthologies, and we've filmed well-known actors reading them, but not a perfect to-camera reading. So in the spirit of humility and vulnerability, we have recorded the whole rehearsal to reading process and left in all the uncertainties and flubs, so that when the students watch it, they can see the actor having dyslexia, struggling to articulate, is it visage or visage in Ozymandias? How do I say that? The emigre, exactly all of these questions, and hopefully to disinhibit the discussion in the room and to share some of their own reflections on the poetry they're about to read, and why they were drawn to that poem in a way that hopefully can help kick off a discussion in a room. So here's a one which is I'm particularly pleased with. This is lovely, which is a reading of the Emigre with Sheila Tim. Sheila you might have seen her in lots of things on television, on stage, but is a very brilliant and clever person. And one of the things that I was blown away by this reading was that Sheila shared her own experiences as an emigrant from Uganda, in a very similar situation to the speaker of that poem by Carol Rumens, who feels an intense connection to home, but also all sorts of guilt about memories that she doesn't really feel are hers because they're secondhand or received through things, relations, or So I'm just going to play you the beginning of this for a sense of what it's like.
I cannot remember the exam board. Is it the emigre? Emigre, yeah. Okay.
Emigre.
The emigre.
Yeah.
It really resonated with me as an immigrant to the UK. It feels like she's talking about her perception of her home, or the memory / the story that she is determined to tell herself about her home. For me, I really resonated with that because
I feel bad about stopping this because this is just much more interesting than what I'm saying. But that's Sheila there. And here is something we've just released about, this is Emily Fairn, who's from Liverpool, great actress. She's reading Shall Earth No More Inspire Thee by Emily Bronte. And that was just released today. So we've got more stuff coming out this year. And if you sign up to the mailing list, it's not going to be a newsletter thing you're going to get once a week. It's just going to be when we have new things, I will email people and say, there's this up on the website. Second strand, Shakespeare. Is basically we went and filmed these in schools using actors' techniques to break down how to approach Shakespeare's language. With a couple of actors I've worked with a lot, Kerry and Tyreek, all sorts of aspects of Shakespeare's language. They are based on the most popular texts of Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and Much Ado, but they at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. But then it's not sort of exhaustive scene by scene. It's much more like a focused approach to a particular aspect of Shakespeare's language. And lastly, and in a way I think most, to me, excitingly, we've got something called Poetry Basics, which are ostensibly stupid questions about poetry. What's the point of rhyme? Why does a line of poetry end? And Ellie here, who's going to speak, and I'm going to get off in a second, has taught some of these. And we've worked with actors, comedians and actors, to break down some fundamental questions of poetry and try to get the students in the class, basically get the famous person to sit the lesson. Again, vulnerability, trying to bring them into the classroom, and trying to make them make a fool of themselves to take the pressure off everyone in the room. And I have to say, when Ellie did line endings, the lesson with Toby Jones, even though none of them knew who Toby Jones was until we said that he was the voice of Dobby, your year 8s and year 9s, I think it was, they were queuing around the classroom to deliver their versions of the poem. So I felt very flattered by that, because there were lots of young men, particularly, who were keen to share. We gave them, I'll let Ellie explain, because I know she's going to explain this, but so those are the 3 strands we've got there up online at the moment. What I am looking to do is for feedback from people. I'm hungry for it, for what works and what doesn't work. I've seen Ellie do this. I've seen her adapt it in a frighteningly short space of time to exactly the way for these basics, poetry basics and Shakespeare's lessons, there are PowerPoints that you can download once you've created an account. And that's what Ellie used. She adapted it, put it in her own idiom, her own formatting, her own font, and ran with the lesson. And I'm really happy for the things to be adapted and used that way. But I love hearing and I love watching teachers teach them. And I love hearing what teachers have to say about teaching them, because this is a great learning for me. And I feel like this is the beginning, really. Ultimately, I would love to have some kind of Key Stage 3 Dead Poets Live scheme of work where we kind of try to spend half a term really getting people excited about poetry, but that's a long way off, and I think we've got a way to go in terms of pedagogy and I don't know, all sorts of other things before then. But I'm going to hand over to Ellie now, and thank you very much for listening to me. Hope that has all made sense. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ellie Stebbing. I'm an English teacher. I'm just going to share my screen so I can talk a bit about my experiences. Can someone give me a thumbs up if they can see that okay? Oh, hang on. Can you see that okay? Yeah, Ollie, you're on my screen, so brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm Ellie. I currently teach English in a secondary school in Lancing at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. So last year I taught Year 12 and this year I'm teaching Year 13. I lead Key Stages 3 and 4 at my school for English, and we've had Dead Poets Live at our school for the last 3 years. It's been a really important part of our Key Stage 3 sort of diet and offer, particularly for our Year 7 students. And we found that it's really sort of reignited a love and a fun sort of element for poetry that, you know, with my Year 11s right now, they've got their exam in very soon. That love can kind of decline and dwindle. So I think it's really important. And yeah, I'm just going to talk a bit about what I've played around with in terms of Dead Poets Live school so far, what's worked, and also things I think moving forward I would do differently as well. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So just to be clear for like what things I've got involved with. So when Ollie was talking about the poetry basics, that was something that was really important to me, and I think something that I've really noticed in my students over the last few years. Their understanding of poetic intention and the choices of poets and the impact of those choices has been quite passive. I found with them, they don't really question why. And so even though it's really important, and a lot of you said in your comments, which I completely agree with, there's no right answer. There's no one way to view it. And actually, in fact, for every reader, we should be interpreting those ideas and those intentions differently. I still think it's important to question why, and that's kind of what these sessions gave my students an opportunity to do. And I've also looked at the Macbeth imagery lesson for Lady Macbeth with my Year 10 students as we taught Macbeth to them this year. And obviously it's also going to be in their GCSEs. But just, I think when you're teaching Macbeth as a GCSE text, the poetry of it gets lost very quickly. And so I found this really useful to kind of look at in a little bit more detail for me as well, because my focus and quite rightly, my focus is obviously on, you know, their ability to succeed, make progress, etc. So the poetic intention session that we did, I did as part of my Year 8 romantics unit, which is one of my favorite units to teach, and we also teach it in Year 13. So it's nice for that 7-year journey. And I think the important questions that we want to ask is, why do poets choose the words they do? Why choose one word over another? And what is the effect of all the words together? Do they link? Do they layer? Do they contradict? Do they complement? And they might do all of those things, but those are the things we want them to really interrogate. And the problem is for most students, if I ask them those questions and I don't give them a way in, they'll just say, because the poet wrote it like that, because they chose that word. It is a very passive response. And so this was a good opportunity to get them to interrogate for themselves. If they are the poet, what would they do? So the lesson that was created was around this really brilliant Wendy Cope poem called The Orange. And as you can see, the words in bold are some of the really important words in terms of intention for like what it brings in terms of meaning in the poem. So this is where we started. We were looking at this poem together. So we were asking the questions, can we absolutely know what an author's intentions were? No. If not, how can we make our best guess? And what is the opposite of intention? Kind of chaos, right? This passivity and lack of necessary focus and meaning. So we wanted them to interrogate that. And so my Year 8 students, I mean, I know Ollie's adapted this now after, I think, partly seeing my lesson, there was a lot of numbers for the words that were going to be taken out of the poem, The Orange. So as you can see, the words in bold are all the words that were going to be removed, to consider what words should go in there, what words, you know, make sense, what don't, what changes the tone and ideas. And my students were choosing the same words. They were choosing their own words to put into that writing frame for that poem. There was a lot of words, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples where some of them work and some of them don't. But I think that's the chaos and the fun of it, and that's what they really enjoyed. So this was a really good session to kind of unpick it and sort of take the pressure off and look at it in a new way. And yeah, Asim Chowdhury does the same process as Ollie mentioned, going through this process of choosing the words that he wants to put in each sort of section, 1 to 23 or whatever the number is now, to create his own poem, not The Orange, but whatever that would be. And some of my students created quite interesting ones. These will be on the slides, obviously, for you to have a look at. But this was one that I found quite interesting, the rope. So instead of obviously the orange, they chose rope as their noun. At lunchtime, I ran a strong rope. The stick of it made us all marching. I attacked it and dropped it with Robert and Dave. They got happiness and I had a fan. And that rope, it made me so tiny, as vicious things often do just lately. The grass, a plastic in the metal. This is fibre and dog. It's hairy. The rest of the day was quite big. I did all the hot dogs on my door and killed them and had some time over. I fry you. I'm glad I ate. So this was obviously a very different poem to The Orange, but for the student who wrote it, he was so proud of himself. The whole story came together, and every time I read it, I think of a different interpretation of what it could mean. How does the plastic in the grass and the metal and the fiber and the dog all link together? But it was a really great experience, and my students still talk about it. They still talk about, oh, do you remember my rope poem, miss? Do you remember my dog poem, miss? That it's a way to bring fun back into it, and that's what we really found. There's a couple where this is one that's on there too. This student sort of very different student, very different sort of tone and meaning. Some things made sense and some things didn't. And again, I think it's good to practice that and have that vulnerable sort of experience. But this was another one where she was really proud and she was able to bring in ideas of things that make her happy. You know, she's a Biba Doobie fan. She's a Laufey fan. She's talking about that and her favorite types of cereals. And all of it came together to create this poem that really sort of summed up parts of her, which again, I think was important for intention. She was thinking about the intention behind her words and her choices and why she would choose one word over another. And that just helped her to interrogate some of those romantic poems in the same way. What words maybe spoke to the poet at the time? What words were influencing them? What cultural references were influencing them, even just like they do for her? So yeah, I found that a really interesting part. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on, but feel free. There's another one in there if you want to have a read yourselves. The second session, which is what Ollie mentioned earlier that we did, was line endings. And this session we did with year 9, we do the Worlds and Lives poems in year 9 rather than at Key Stage 4 at the moment, because we're trialing it with the younger year groups and sort of developing our practice with these, because lots of the teachers obviously haven't taught those poems before. But again, line endings is a really important element that my students at Key Stage 4 particularly don't necessarily question or consider. So why do poets choose to end a line when they do? Why are some lines shorter than others? Why do they have end stops? And why do others not? And again, the response I often get is because the poet wrote it like that, because they wanted to. And that passivity is just something that you want to give them a chance to change and question and interrogate within themselves. So the same thing, we looked at different ways to end a line. And I think this was a really important element. I know some of you said that in the comments, you were saying how you're looking to develop a Key Stage 3 poetry unit. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned from doing this lesson with my students was how little they actually are exposed to poetry in their own lives. The poetry they see often is the poetry that we put in front of them. And if we only put, some of the greats, but the war poets and these kind of very sort of distant poems from their own lives, there's a real lack of any kind of connection between them and different types of poetry, and a real like small lens into which they think poetry can be, not looking at how poetry actually is the most experimental of all types of writing, and how that's a real gift for them that they could actually use. So we looked at different types of poems. They really loved the We Real Cool poem. They really liked reading it aloud and sort of practicing the we and the rhythm of the words, and the enjambment there as well. So it gave them exposure, and it gave them a choice to a chance to experiment. And then we gave them a poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. So they had The Red Wheelbarrow as a poem, and they had to break it down themselves. So we use mini whiteboards to do that, and we just asked them on their own to read the poem on the board and decide where would they put line breaks. And they were going to use enjambment as well, but where would they create those gaps? What felt right to them? What moments felt like an end and what felt like a beginning? And I don't think they'd ever really questioned that within themselves before. So it gave them a way to choose and decide for themselves, and then justify their opinions as well. Why did they want to do that? So yeah, they gave we gave them, after they'd been practicing, we gave them the original. And in this example, as Ollie mentioned, Toby Jones does the same lesson. He does the same thing. He chooses where each of the lines should end and which ones should begin. And it got a real discussion going about what changes if we do it like this or we do it like that. What changes? And again, once we'd had that conversation, some of them decided, oh, I don't think I want to put my line ending here anymore. I want to put it here instead. I think this is important. And then, as Ollie mentioned, the most brilliant part of it was how many students wanted to stand up in front of the class and read out their version of the poem with their pauses and their run-on lines, and what words gave emphasis based on those line endings, which again, for me, was so brilliant to see, because a lot of the time they don't even consider why a line ends where it does. So to have such a strong opinion on where they think it should be just sort of turned the whole conversation on its head, and gave us a chance to discuss things that often a lot of them would not feel able to discuss or part of the conversation. And this brought all of them in. So yeah, I just thought that was really important. I'm conscious of time. We finish at 5:30, do we? Yeah, okay, cool. The last thing I just wanted to say was, obviously, I've mentioned Key Stage 3, and I also looked at Key Stage 4, so the imagery session, which is slightly different and more sort of specific for Macbeth for my students. And what I really wanted to do with imagery is that I think most students feel quite confident using the word imagery and saying, for example, in this this soliloquy, the word hell links the devil, showing Lady Macbeth as evil. I see a lot of that in my students still. Their exam is on Monday. They'll give me an essay, and it will be quite surface level, no exploration, no unpicking or connotations or linking to what they know about the word or why. And this is what the session got me to ask them and got me to consider. Pick one word, like, for example, hell. What does your word smell like? What color would your word be? What is the temperature of your word? And there was a series of questions that I think in that case, it was one of the actors and the students in the school. They were doing the same lesson. And so I was getting the actor, the video, and then the students had picked their word. And again, mini whiteboard adding to what they knew. And it just gave us an opportunity to kind of, again, look at language in a new way. And it just, again, makes us think about why, Shakespeare's why. So the student then, who'd written that quite surface level idea at the start of the lesson, was able to develop it a bit further and build an interpretation that was quite unique based on thinking about answering those questions related to the word. So lots of things that I think are really brilliant, and I've really enjoyed teaching with my students. And I would just really encourage you to sort of have a look at what you feel is important for you and adapt it, as Ollie said, because I found that really useful to kind of think about my students and what's their priority. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you. It was fascinating to see your account of using the resources and how you've shaped and adapted them to the students that are in front of you. So thank you very much. We do have time now for some questions. So you guys who are with us, if you want to pop them in the chat box and we can get to them. But there is one sitting in there already. So we can start off with that one. This comes from Phil. So Ollie, this one is for you about whether you would visit FE colleges as well as schools.
Sorry, yeah, hello, Phil. Yeah, no, I think we definitely would. I think the funny thing is that we haven't yet. It would be interesting to speak further, if Phil, if you wanted to get in touch about what kind of thing your students would like, or would it be interested in? Because our show is very much, I guess, there's elements of participation in it. There's a lot of kids getting up on stage. That's another crucial thing about the show. So people are joining in, the standing up and becoming the gods of the tribe that for the duration of that session we have created in the room. So it is quite year 7 and year 8. It's pitched at, but I would be very interested to know what your students would appreciate, be interested in, because I am trying to think of other live in-school shows for slightly older groups. I'm actually working with a guy who's a spoken word poet, and trying to do that as a session, as something that we could do in school. But yeah, I'd be very open to hearing from you. Yeah, so please get in touch.
While we just wait and see if any more questions come in, Ollie, I don't know if you wanted to say a bit more about what you've got kind of coming up or in the pipeline for Dead Poets, if you want to give us a bit more detail on that.
Yes. Well, we've got lots of. Well, there are actually. I haven't mentioned one of the big things. So we're trying in the course of this year to do what we did for the anthology poems for the whole of Power and Conflict. So that's, I think, 15 poems. We've also filmed a. We've also filmed a sitcom. I'll just quickly share with you here, if I can just share my screen again. So this is our sitcom, right? Which sounds very unlikely, but we have basically created here a sitcom, which is a response to Power and Conflict, using with Tyreek, who has done lots of our shows. So this is our attempt to rival Mr. Bruff, if you like. It's an attempt to. These are two characters here you see on your screen: Tyreek and his younger sister. They're called Ryan and Maya in the thing. Tyreek is playing a guy in his mid-20s, a not very successful actor, which is probably slightly out of character because Tyreek's actually doing quite well. And this is his younger sister. She's taking Power and Conflict. He remembers every word of the anthology. So the sitcom takes the form of like a YouTube breakdown video where she doesn't enjoy poetry and he's having to proselytize for poetry. And if I can just sort of skip ahead, you basically have, graphics of the poem like you would find on a revision study aid like Mr. Bruff. So it's two really kind of it's just more fun basically than watching, as much as I actually think Mr. Bruff is a bit of a genius, but it's just hopefully more fun. You're basically watching 20 minutes or 15 minutes of a sitcom, edited in kind of mad, I find it mad anyway, kind of modern short form style, with the camera jumping around everywhere, and pictures of Marie Antoinette with her head rolling off and all this kind of horrible history stuff. I'm hoping that that will be a thing that we're releasing. But beyond that, we've also got just a bunch of this is the things that we're currently editing or we've got there. So there's Bella Ramsey there. You can see they're reading The Wolf Photographer. That'll be coming out soon. Edward Blumel, he's doing Lines Written in Early Spring. That is on Worlds and Lives. That's coming soon. Hamid Anamashon, Malachi Kirby there, who's reading Exposure by Wilfred Owen, and then Michael Balogun, extraordinary reading of The Prelude. Michael Balogun, great actor, basically had the experience that Wordsworth describes in The Prelude and shares his experience. Very vivid and interesting actor. And Miran Mack there, who's reading a bit of Carol Ann Duffy and actually has been to George Square, so can tell the readers of Before You Were Mine exactly what it means to go clattering across it. So yeah, there's various videos coming up, and there's various other projects I've kind of got going, particularly trying to think about rhyme and I think I've spoken to Becky about this a bit before, but yeah. So there's things coming up in the coming months. There's going to be a lot of stuff basically beginning on the anthologies. Yeah, so I'll stop there maybe.
Thanks ever so much, Ollie. Yeah, that was really good to have a glimpse, a sneaky little peek into what's coming up. In the chat, Mike is saying, made a comment that about loving the empowerment of pupils in these approaches. And he notes that in the Poetry by Heart online anthologies and associated resources, they're trying to encourage ownership and confidence in relation to engaging with poetry. And he notes a lot of synergy between Ellie, what you've described, and Ollie, what you've shown, and what the folks at Poetry by Heart are doing.
Okay, I might just come in there just to say that I love Poetry by Heart, and Julie and Tim have been super helpful to me, and have given me lots of very helpful advice about how to go to try to go about this sort of thing. And I just think what they do is brilliant. So, and they've built this amazing thing. And I sometimes think that if we all just went home and learned poems, the world would just be a better place, really. So, yeah, that's all I've got to say about that. Sorry. Thanks. And I'm going to answer Mark's question. Mark says, will the Dead Poets School add more strands to the basics, perhaps teaching students to begin writing their own poems? Yes. So my plan is that the poetry basics is the bit that grows, and particularly what I would like is to adapt, I suppose, what our live show, which is called What is Poetry, into a kind of a very fun set of kind of activities and almost gamified things that you can do in classrooms, where you have to pretend in the classroom that you're all a tribe and that you create a god, which is what happens in the show. But there's certain things that I think we could excerpt there that you could do in the course of a lesson, and that would be a kind of interesting beginning foundation in poetry. But I think definitely part of that, what I really like and what I'd really take inspiration from is sort of slow writing. So definitely encouraging students to either write their own poems or fill in. There's one of the other lessons we do is called Poetry to Prose, and we take an extract from Edward Thomas's diary and then the poem that it became, which is called Addlestrip, and leave lots of blanks in the poem that it became, and ask students to translate from the diary entry to the poem and see what poem they create out of that. So yes, I'm very into slow writing, and I think that's definitely my idea of the way to go, is to make students make the decisions that poets have to make. I think that's the best way of teaching someone why that word rather than that word. Anyway, I'll be quiet now, sorry.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Ollie. And I just wanted to note in the chat, Phil is saying that Reading College has had a Poetry by Heart finalist this year. So congratulations. And we'll see you at the grand finale in the summer. I think it's just worth emphasizing again that just like Poetry by Heart, Dead Poets School is totally, entirely free to you, to the teacher, to access, to download, to use. And what I think is really important is that, as Ellie has demonstrated, these resources are there for you to use your expertise and your agency to turn them into whatever you need for your class. They're not didactic. You don't have to do them exactly the way they're set out. They're there for you as a resource, which I think is incredibly important for teachers. So we're at the end of our time together. We could keep going, and I would love to hear more from you, Ollie and Ellie. So I hope we stay in touch and we can check in on your work again in the future. So thank you, Ollie and Ellie, for being so generous with your time and your expertise. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. And don't forget to check out Dead Poets Live and Dead Poets School. And if you would like me to connect you with Ollie or with Ellie, please do just drop me a line, hello@englishassociation.ac.uk, and we can keep talking. So I'll release you all to your evenings. Thank you very much.